almost everyone should be working on themselves first and or in parallel with whatever they're trying to do to make the world a better place. But if you're looking for a few characteristics that would stand out to me, one would be emotional dysregulation. If they are so pushed by the world that they act emotionally, then I would suggest to them that there's some inner work they need to do, because most likely they're going to take decisions that in the short run feel good, maybe, but in the long run might be consequential to the effects they want to have on the world.
Michael Ostrolenk, MA, MFT, is a master coach and psychotherapist specializing in resilience, leadership, and relational mastery. He is the founder of Resilience Optimized, a men's group, creator of the Relationship Dojo, and a co-leader of Team Fudoshin, integrating warrior discipline, somatic intelligence, and depth psychology. Michael Ostrolenk, welcome.
Thanks, Max. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. You and I have had many over the years. This is so cool.
Yeah, it's been too long, and I have a feeling we'll do more of these. But before I get ahead of myself, I just want to tell the audience that I've long admired you. And about you, I frequently say to people, there are life coaches and there are life coaches. So I hope you take that as a tremendous compliment. So let's dive in. I've noticed a pretty disturbing trend. There seem to be a lot of broken people out there who want to fix the world. What are some of the markers of those who need to work on themselves first? And what are some of the fundamental ways they can do that?
Well, I would say almost everyone should be working on themselves first and or in parallel with whatever they're trying to do to make the world a better place. But if you're looking for a few characteristics that would stand out to me, one would be emotional dysregulation. If they are so pushed by the world that they act emotionally, then I would suggest to them that there's some inner work they need to do, because most likely they're going to take decisions that in the short run feel good, maybe, but in the long run might be consequential to the effects they want to have on the world. So one of the characteristics would be emotional dysregulation. I'll say another one is tunnel blindness. I worked 20 years in the transpartisan space. Has nothing to do with the trans movement. Transpartisan is kind of a way of looking at the world, look at the multitude of worldviews that inform how we think about and operate in the world. And I find that so many activist type are so locked into their worldview, their ideology, that they're unable or unwilling to take in other information that might affirm what they believe, or it might give them some questions to start expanding at what they believe and how they want to meet their goals and the ends that they're seeking politically or culturally, whatever it happens to be. So, if they are both emotionally dysregulated and or find themselves like so locked into a particular thought system, that would indicate to me that they need some possible help and some self-reflection and some deep inner work.
It seems like that suggests that one have self-awareness first, or be able to see that they are emotionally dysregulated. But often people don't see that about themselves. How does one tell a friend or inform them that they are emotionally dysregulated?
It's a great question. I don't necessarily work in the friend space. I work in the couple space, and it's even more of a challenging thing for a spouse to hold up a mirror to their partner. And it's very particular to the relationship that you found yourself in. So you got to understand how the person responds to what they might perceive as criticism. And you have to be skillful in the way you bring something up to them. So it's like you really have to be more curious and knowledgeable about them. I mean, you can just be an ass and just say something to them, and maybe that might open them up. But if your intent is to save the relationship and even deepen the relationship, then I would actually go with more curiosity than you're just doing this stupid because whatever the thing might be. That's more direct and most likely counterproductive. Doesn't mean it's always counterproductive. I have friends who just call me out on shit all the time, and I love that. I much prefer that than much more diplomatic engagement, but that's the kind of relationship agreements that I have with certain people. If you don't have that, then I would suggest much more curiosity. Ask them questions and help through the curiosity and the questions you asked, it hopefully help them open up to be more self-reflective. But the key to asking good questions is not directive. You're not guiding them somewhere. They'll pick that up at some subtle level. You have to actually be really curious about the person.
Yeah, that sounds intuitively right, although it can be exceedingly difficult in these kind of conversations with people. I've developed, for example, a sensitivity over the years about getting hot in traffic, letting my tempers flare. You know, my kids are not terribly diplomatic about things. They're, "Dad, chill out." And you gotta, you know, hear that, internalize it, and change your behavior. And I've definitely endeavored to do that over the years, but I also have some seasoning and some maturity. What do you find is difficult about maturity in the sense for anyone who has not developed that level of self-reflection yet as a less mature person or a younger person, less experienced and so on?
Like when I work with my clients, I ask them two questions, or we explore two questions. Let me put it that way: why they do what they do and how they do it. And the why is very psychodynamically. Oh, it's because my mother, my father, when I was 5 or 7 or 12, and that's kind of interesting. You kind of get the where the seed of a particular behavior emerged from, but that doesn't necessarily change behavior or consciousness. You know, the how is the second question, what I explore much more intently with my clients. How do you know you're experiencing the thing that you just said you're experiencing? I'll give you an example. So someone says, I'm really angry. How do you know you're angry? I'm angry. I'm just angry. I said, okay, cool. And I spend a little bit of time with them kind of diving in, and I'm somatically trained. So the body is a really important part of my work. And let's just say over, a couple sessions in, or even that same session, they start becoming aware of my questions, what it actually means for them. And they might say something like, oh, when I get angry, my heartbeat gets a little bit faster. Or I notice I'm holding my breath, or a little bit of tension in the shoulders or the jaw, whatever the thing is. Everyone's kind of unique in how they do a particular emotion, how they do whatever their defensive structure is in terms of being activated or triggered by another human being. But once they start becoming aware of that, that's the first stage of the maturity. Because once you know how you do the thing, then I can teach you how to do it differently. It's not just black and white. You just don't go from I do this and I don't do this. But it's like I do this, and now I know how to interdict into the human system, cognitively, emotionally, energetically, structurally, like with the posture and muscle tone and stuff like that. And when I start interdicting, I start creating the space between me and my reaction. That's where the freedom comes in. And I start getting more responsive. And that responsiveness is maturity. Because I'm not 3, I don't have to act out my emotions. I'm 20 or 25 or 40 or 50 or 60, whatever the age might be. And I'm like, okay, I feel the things. Awesome. I don't want people to repress their feelings. That's unhealthy. We can talk about that. But like, I feel it, but I don't have to act on it. And that's that space, the responsiveness, that's the key to, in my opinion, to a lot of the maturity that we want to see more of in our world.
So it reminds me of, so you have this theme of resilience in your work, I think is really important. And I want to come back to that for a moment. I was struck recently by a book by Abigail Schreier called Bad Therapy. I don't know if you've seen it.
No, but okay. Tease me. I need that.
It's interesting. The idea is that a lot of contemporary therapy is plagued by what she calls iatrogenesis,
Yeah.
which is essentially treatment that makes people worse off, right?
Yeah.
It seems to be like there is this kind of therapeutic mainstay these days where you want to keep your customers coming back rather than do no harm and heal them, or help them heal, help them, equip them with the facility to, as it were, heal themselves. I don't want to medicalize people's psychologies, their psychological state too much, but I definitely want to point out that in terms of improvement, whether it's personality, emotional regulation, or even sort of psychiatric disorders, we want to not make them worse off. And a lot of therapy these days seems to be doing that. It's like, let's poke at the traumas. Let's get them to always talk about their traumas. And this seems to make them become dependent on the therapist rather than having the therapist where they can come someday and say, thank you. You've been great, but I'm feeling good now and I don't need you anymore. What's your take on this? Have you seen any of that?
Oh, 100%. I'm very fortunate. One of my mentors is Dr. Stuart Suvatsky. I've been friendly with him and collegial with him for 3 decades now. He's been saying the same thing. So that's been ingrained in my mindset. So I love that perspective. I definitely want to pick up the book. When I work when I work with people, I think about humans, the human system in 4 different components. and we're integrated wholes. But let me just walk through each of the components for argument's sake, for discussion's sake. There are wounds that do need to be healed, and I'll speak to that because that speaks to what you just said. Yes, I also work on self-regulation, because if you're unable to regulate yourself, then you're a child, you're not a mature adult, because you just act out. Okay, and no judgment. That's what we do, unless we learn and are trained how to do it differently. The third piece of this is evolution of consciousness. There are 21 lines of development that I'm familiar with: moral, cognitive, emotional. And it's like, where are you and what's the next iteration of your development? And then optimizing the physical system. Your sleep, your diet, nutrition, your fitness, your movement, circadian biology, stress management. Because, here's my favorite thing. And then I'll get back to the wounds, because that's really your question. But one of my favorite things when I work with a couple, for instance, I start with the physiological stuff, and people are like, "Why are you talking about our diet? Why are you talking about our sleep?" Because if your vitality is down, your energy is off, you're hangry, you're just off because you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you're not moving, your circadian biology is off because of the technology or exogenous chemicals. It's really hard to show up in your relationship in a loving, caring, compassionate way, or even dive into the issues because you feel like crap. Let's dial those things in, and then you have the more energy and the capacity physically to do the mental, emotional work and spiritual work that you need to do. Okay, back to the wound. The wound piece is where my experience would suggest a lot of the therapists get caught up in. We've identified the wound, then we identify the person with the wound, and we keep them locked into that system. I think it's important to deal with wounds and try to heal them, but the idea, like you suggested, is to heal them. How do you heal them? Well, part of it's self-regulation, part of it's evolution of consciousness, and part of it's optimizing the physical system. Because if you just keep them locked into that identity, as the author suggested, and I believe you believe, you're just going to keep them in that merry-go-round of like, oh, I'm this thing, this is my new identity, and I'm going to organize my life around that identity. And that's completely unhealthy in the long run.
If you're a creative, a builder, or an innovator, you might be ready to win funding. Through Human Respect Labs, you can get up to $30,000 to fund your next creative project. But not just any project. We're looking for 6 kinds of builders: video storytellers, community builders, writers, entrepreneurs, strategists, and innovators, any of which should be dedicated to human liberation. That means making government obsolete. Why? We know too much energy goes into politics, but not enough goes into real solutions. So if you're a freedom lover and you have a project idea that promotes peace, autonomy, and voluntary collaboration, we want to hear from you. Apply now at humanrespectlabs.org. That's humanrespectlabs.org. Criticize by creating. I know that you've worked in the public policy space. There is almost like wrapping oneself up in one's pathology as identity and trying to work. And this sort of goes back to the original question about broken people trying to fix the world. It's not only is pathology becoming identity, it's also an issue where when you identify as X, and that is somebody with either mental illness or traumas or what have you, where there's becomes this obsession with traumas and trauma bonding and all this stuff. And it almost seems like a look at me, I'm a victim. And it's a mass psychological thing that's being transmitted through social media vectors even.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Do you see that in your practice, and how do you deal with that? I guess we can go back to this issue of resilience, which has been lingering.
Yeah. So the answer is I see it culturally. It's getting worse and worse and worse as a cultural phenomenon. I think it's always been there, but it just seems to be getting worse, especially with social media. In my clients, I'd say it's much more subtle because I'm very fortunate. And I say fortunate, like I'd work, just the clientele that is attracted to my work is less likely to be grossly connected to the victim mentality. Now, at the very subtle levels, they are. We all are, including myself. Like, I will notice some language over time, even though I've been working on this stuff for my whole life. Feels like I still will notice some victim language. So at least for me, there's still some of it in there. With my clients, it's much more subtle than gross. It's not like, as you might see in the political sense, like, oh my God, I'm the victim of this thing and you're the evil thing. And I see a lot less of that. However, I mean, in marriages, how many times have you talked to a friend who's married or getting divorced? And it's always about my partner or my wife or husband. It's like they're pointing to the other person as the evil person, and I'm the victim. And yes, there are people who are abusive. Yes, that's very true. Put the small number aside. Both people played some role in the thing, and maybe one of them played more of a role than the other. Okay, but you most likely both played some role in the whole situation. And I want people to understand that. All right. But that speaks to then the sociocultural piece. You wanted to circle back to.
resilience. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean,
So,
short of giving away your trade secrets, I wouldn't want
yeah,
you to do that.
so, I work with JC Glick. He's a former Army Ranger. I co-lead the men's group with him. And we have a concept called Resilience 2.0. And JC is 11 combat tours. He's very familiar with resilience in the combat sense of things. But 1.0 is like David Goggins, let's run 100 miles before breakfast, or Jocko Willem, pump out our weights at 4:30 in the morning. All that stuff is really cool. Depending where you are in your life and the season of your life and what you might need. Some people take it to the extreme, and that can be dangerous for them health-wise in the long run.
Sure.
But some young men actually need that kind of discipline to get them off the couch or off the bed, away from their games, and get it real life. So I love that stuff for some people. 2.0 is like, cool, let's integrate that. Like, yeah, hard physical training, developing mental toughness is really good for you and physical capability.
Oh, and
But
eat and sleep too, right? Like you said earlier.
man, I love Dr. Kirk Parsley. He's a former SEAL. He's a sleep doctor. And I've had him on my podcast, and I've known him for decades. I taught with him at SEAL Fit at one point. And like, I love talking to him because he points out, like, the SEALs, I think they're getting better at this presently, thank goodness. But like, they're hyper alpha driven kind of guys, and we'll sleep when we're dead. And then, they have combat tours and training evolutions, which kind of supports that. Like, we don't need to fucking sleep. And then he just watches their testosterone collapse and their physiology follow suit. So to your point, yeah, it's great to push yourself and see what you're capable of. But just like 1 or 2 nights of poor sleep, and you start cascading effects on cognition and immune systems and all the kind of diseases that are now prevalent in the world. So yes, sleep. Back to Resilience 2.0. What JC and I will tell people is part of the resilience is, are you, and this is just for men, you run a men's group, but these are for humans. Are you capable of sitting in your own experience for longer periods of time? What I mean by that is, like, well, just stick with men, but this is both genders or sexes. It's like we have a lot of distractions: drugs, porn, alcohol, YouTube, Netflix, working out. And like, I don't like what's going on inside of myself, so I'm going to distract myself with the things out there. And we're really good at that, and the technology supports that. Cool. And I would suggest to people, men in particular in this case, is like, hey, if you really want to be resilient, stop the distractions, or at least reduce the immediacy of seeking the distraction, and see if you can sit in your own experience for longer periods of time. Because your emotions, the energetics of the body, the thoughts, all the stuff that's going on that you don't like, that you're trying to escape from, is valuable information about how you are living your life and or how you're experiencing your relationship to self and others.
It's sort of like it's like a devious accountant who papers over all of the problems, the underlying financial problems of a company, and then puts on a brave face and everything's great, and then all of a sudden the whole business is going tits up. Well, the same can be true for your body and your mental health as well. Yeah. I take it
100%. Because what I'll tell people is, if you don't deal with the stuff inside yourself, 1 or 2 things are going to happen. It will come out sideways, meaning it'll come out as passive aggressive behavior, which your partners, your friends, your coworkers aren't going to particularly like. That kind of sucks. People act out that way. And or it could come out as chronic illness. I've studied mind-body medicine for over 30 years now, but at least 30 years. And there are strong correlations between our emotional life and our physical health. We're learning more and more and more about that over time. So like just for your own health reasons, let alone like not being asked to other people, like, sit longer with your stuff. Cause as we just shared, there's valuable information there. And I like the analogy of the metaphor actually that you shared with the accountant. That's cool. I often use that one.
Well, and there's some book that my wife keeps telling me about that I simply must read called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, great. I will do that. And folks can tell us in the comments whether they've read that book too. But
Yes.
moving to this idea well, there's a couple things on resilience. The first one is, it strikes me that with what we have referred to in this as a pervasive victimhood mentality,
Yeah. Yeah.
there seems to be this mass removal of an internal locus of control, which I think I remember you saying starts with emotional regulation. To be good decision makers, or to position oneself to act, we have to have a certain centeredness or alignment before making a decision or before action. Otherwise, we become really reactive, not
100%.
reflective, but reactive.
Right.
And I'm seeing this everywhere on people who are on these sort of social media dopamine drips, and just really a tendency to be hypersensitive and reactive and thinking of themselves as victims in every turn and identifying with that. Can you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about this notion of an internal versus external locus of control?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about a lot in my work, my writings, my talks is self-mastery. You have to have a good self to master. And we can talk about transcending the self because that's also part of it too, because you don't want to get locked into a particular identity you've created. But part of this is literally mastering your internal states, your thoughts, your feelings, the energetics of the body, all the stuff that's going on there. And you can't do that if you don't have a strong self sense, a place that you can operate out of. And I do hear in Chinese, in kind of Taoist philosophy, it comes out of here. The martial arts comes out of here. Different schools of thought have different locations for where your sense of self is. In the West, it's like it's your brain because it's in your head. Doesn't matter. Like you can have your own metaphor, whatever works for you. I think though it's important for all of us as human beings, especially if you want to evolve, learn, adapt, overcome the challenges we face, is to strengthen our locus of control. And I want to be really light around control because it's not like repression. I'm not saying you should be stoic in the misunderstanding of stoicism and repress yourself and because that just leads to
Right.
problems. It's
It's not
more like
gritting your teeth. It's finding
no,
centeredness.
yeah, it's not great because that just leads to TMJ and will give you headaches. It's like we don't want that. It is that place inside oneself, that calm, cool, centered place that's that's capable of observing your own psychophysiology. You notice like, wow, this thing triggers me. This thing upsets me. This thing makes me angry. This brings up a lot of guilt, but you're so centered in yourself that you're not acting on that stuff. You can choose to. You can get angry and you can road rage, but you're choosing to do so. You can feel guilty and collapse. You can choose to do so, but you're not at cause of other things happening to you. Like what I'll tell my couples, especially men, because men, and this is broad generalization, but they're like, I'm in control. I'm sovereign. I can do whatever I want. Cool. All right. How are you when your wife says X, Y, and Z? Oh, that pisses me off. And then he'll walk through all the stuff that happens when he gets pissed off. I was like, that's not sovereignty. Like that means she has a lot of control over you. Like you should look at that. That's not, so to be able to observe your own psychophysical processes and then choose how you want to manage them, to me is a sign of maturity. And it requires, as you said, kind of that internal locus of centeredness and control.
That's beautifully said. And I don't think, and we're going to get a little bit, if we have time, we're going to get to relationships between couples. But I have certainly found that as I've gotten older and it's become, absolutely necessary to cultivate good relationship with my wife, that I've had to develop this. What do I do with the initial feeling of getting hot? How can I reflect on, how can I let that feeling pass and then mirror back something positive to try to help the other person understand why the words or behavior elicited that response in me, and express that without anger, and try to understand where the person was coming from because maybe I misinterpreted it. This kind of mirroring of, for lack of a better way of putting it, ahimsa,
Hmm.
like in the Vedic traditions,
Great.
this
Mhm.
nonviolence, or not like nonviolent communication. That emotional self-regulation for me, and trying to mirror, or invite the other person to mirror my more staid behavior, my more reflective and curious behavior, has been just really amazing. And
Good.
I
Good.
think that that speaks to the part of the resilience you're talking about. But now I want to turn to this idea. I think basically Nicholas Taleb took Nietzsche, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger,
Mhm.
and made it into his own thing, put a label on it, and that's called anti-fragile.
Yeah.
Perhaps you've read that book.
A
Excellent
million
stuff.
times. Yep.
If you care about freedom and you're tired of partisan bumper stickers, welcome to Underthrow. This show explores liberation through creativity, entrepreneurship, and innovation. We talk with subversive thinkers and radical innovators about what actually works, how ideas become experiments, and experiments become the shoots of civilization. If you're interested in building something outside the usual power structures, subscribe to Underthrow. This is me being a little bit experimental with my thinking, and you may be like, whoa, easy now, camper. But I try to think of it sometimes as there will be inevitable traumas, and I don't like to overstate trauma, right? I don't want to overstate that. I'm sure you don't either. But sometimes bad things are going to happen to us, and we're going to have wounds, and then we're going to have scars. Is there a sense in which our failures, our traumas, and the way we respond to those things can make us stronger, or am I overstating it?
Post-traumatic growth, I think is what it's called in the literature. So I believe so. And this is not judging anyone who has not been able to do that for themselves. Like, we all have different capacities. And it's also about the support you have around you and your both your inner psychological capacity, but your physical capacity we talked about earlier, sleep, diet, nutrition, fitness, circadian biology, all that kind of good stuff. I do believe that, and actually, I actually, this is my little saying: smile at adversity. And when I say smile at adversity, I'm not saying like like don't take it seriously because it's real. Like shit, really bad things happen to us as human beings or to people we care and love. That's very true. But if you can begin to recognize that that's innate in life, Buddhism, like life is suffering at some levels, and you can just accept the world as it really is because that is part of life. That's kind of where the smile comes from. Just like, okay, this is just part of life and I can accept it. And somewhere along on that path of going through whatever the trauma is or the adversity is begin to start asking the question, and this is a really hard one for a lot of people, not why is this happening to me? Why is this happening for me? Meaning, like, what can I basically learn from this? What can I use from this horrible experience so I can be a better human being? And that, whatever, I don't know the answers because I don't know particular things, whatever the thing is, but like if one is capable, and it's not necessarily like it happens and everyone's like just capable of doing it right then and there. This could be weeks, months, years later with a lot of self-reflection. But if you're capable of taking the lessons from it and integrating them into your life to be a better human being, yes, I think there's a lot of room for post-traumatic growth.
That reminds me, sometimes the best wisdom is the oldest wisdom.
Hmm.
And I'm reminded of the account of the Buddhist monk Milarepa, who
Oh,
found himself going into a cave, a dark, scary cave, and he was visited by demons,
wow.
fears, past traumas, you name it, and they manifest themselves in ghoulish ways. The first thing Milarepa did was to find courage, which is to overcome fear, right?
Mhm.
There's never, courage is not the absence of fear. It is overcoming fear, right? And people
That's
should
right.
always remember that.
Yeah.
But then he had enough self-possession, as Buddhist monks will, finding that equipoise, finding that centeredness, to say, okay, I'm going to have a I'm going to invite these demons in for tea,
Yeah.
essentially, and we're going to have a talk. And that process allows you to regard some of the difficulties, the bad memories, this and that, without identifying with them, without letting them reharm you, and so on. And this sounds like maybe the Buddhists had something, centuries ago that modern psychology has learned from, and I really appreciate that.
Can I just speak to that real quickly? Because you just
Yeah, yeah.
reminded me, because I've studied, I love Tibetan Buddhism. I studied it when I was in San Francisco Bay Area, in the Berkeley area. Psychosynthesis is a school of psychological thought that came around Jung and Freud around the same time. And it's subpersonalities. And present day IFS, internal family systems, is parts. It's the same kind of thing. But you just remind me, like, oh shit, this has been around for thousands of years. The Buddhists, like, they've been talking parts forever, just with different language. So I really appreciate you just reminding me of that. Like, there's nothing new under the sun. We just name things these days.
Yeah, in terms of the as you know, because I've reached out to you about it as the pro, trying to put together a young men's group for work, sort of comprehensive way young men can develop, in virtue, excellence, and that kind of that equipoise, that centeredness that is so lacking in today's world, where they're turning to the most grotesque shitbags online and looking up to them as models. But let me not stray too much. Um, one of the things that I've been trying to integrate is this sense of alignment, and repeating it as a message of emotional regulation. There's something about that as a kind of linchpin for all the stuff that people, if people really work on that first, that sense of alignment and reflection and sort of overcoming the emotional storms. I'm drifting here a little bit, but I think it's worthwhile. I call it head, heart, and gut alignment,
Perfect.
right?
I love. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and so where head is thinking, heart is
Mhm.
feeling, and gut is action potential.
Mhm.
Are you in a position to translate your thoughts and words into deeds, or your
Yeah.
thoughts and feelings into deeds in a healthy way? The
Yes.
first
Yeah.
thing that has to happen is that alignment, that
Yeah.
equipoise, and you're equipping people with those skills. And I'm trying to do it not as a professional, but just through the message, and as a hopefully a future mentor in the program, you can really help some of these guys do that. I'm curious also, it seems like young men on the one hand are not going to be able to do that as well because they're still developing in certain sense. I think men develop their prefrontal cortices until they're 25.
If we're lucky.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And part of this is maturation, but
Mhm.
I wonder about older guys, because there are interventions there too. Can you teach old dogs new tricks?
Definitely so. So most of my clientele are in their 30s to 60s. Now, I've been working with some young men, and I have over the years, but in the recent, let me just share, it's really fascinating. About 2 years ago by now, I had so many parents reach out to me, and they have like 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old young men. And they're like, our son he's a really nice guy. He's really kind, but he has no grit, no resilience, no mental toughness. He falls apart at everything. He has no why. He's not driven towards anything. He has no vision for his future. And I kept hearing that over and over and over again. So, and we will address that maybe today or another conversation. But to old men and new tricks, or old dogs and new tricks, completely. We know enough about the brain that the brain, it can learn and adapt and change as you get new experiences. And my work, I use the martial arts as a metaphor, like with my couples, it's the relationship dojo. You got to train every day. You got to earn your title as husband or wife or as parent or whatever the thing is, or young man, like, shung up in the world. Like, what are the titles that you carry that you need to show that you're capable of doing the thing? Whatever the things are, like, you got to earn that every day. For the older guys, yes, for sure. Yes, if you do the work, and this is the challenge for most humans, especially young people, because we live in the day of Amazon. You order right now and it shows up yesterday. Like, when I talk to my potential new clients and I've been told I shouldn't really do this, I'm like, I almost talk them out of working with me to a certain extent. I'm like, are you willing to do hard work? This isn't you talk me every other week and then you talk me every other week. This is like, I give you homework. Like you stuff you're in graduate school, you have to do 5 hours of homework every day. But like there are practices, there are disciplines, there are things you need to be doing on a regular basis. It's not just self-reflection. It's like, let's create an AM ritual. Let's create a PM ritual. Are you doing the meditation, the physical training, the journaling, those conversations you have to have with your spouse, whatever the things are that are part of the work I do with people? This takes time and effort and energetic resources. If you do the effing work, unless something's wrong with your brain, you can grow and change. So the
That
answer
is
is yes.
so beautiful. I'm glad there's a professional out there who's teaching these lessons. I've got 7 enumerated social virtues and 7 personal virtues.
Nice.
And one of the things I point out in this practice as this young men's group, at least I hope to, because right now we're developing the content, is with virtues, which is an ancient conception, right? It's immoral. It's the practice of morality or the practice of becoming more excellent, right? It's not just a concept like, is this action right or wrong, right? That tends to be more of a Western sensibility, or at least a more contemporary sensibility. Whereas ancient practitioners, like your Buddhists, like your yogis, your Buddhists, your Far East, Shaolin monks, to go to your more martial metaphor, and your ancient Greeks and Romans were very, very much about virtue, but virtue is a practice. It's thought, word, and deed. And one of the things I've tried to bring across is like, you have to practice everything. You have to practice integrity being one of them. Let's just go with the social virtue of integrity. You have to tell the truth. You have to tell yourself the truth. You have to tell others the truth. You have to make commitments. You have to honor those commitments. You have to show up in the world. You have to practice doing that and being better at it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't practice it and think of it as something that you master, you're not going through the personal mastery that's going to be required to make you resilient and therefore take you to a place where your relationships are healthier, your professional life is healthier, and so on. So thank you for that, Michael. That is enormously validating in terms of.
I love the fact you brought up character, because it's an important part of my work, and it's unfortunate that I don't find it in a lot of psychotherapeutic models. I don't practice as a therapist anymore. I practice as a coach, but it plays such an important role in the work I do. And I will, like, alignment is how I kind of talk about it. Integrity, alignment. Like, you claim that these are your values, these are your principles. How are you living your life? If you're not living your life as an expression of those things, then maybe these aren't really your values and principles. Or we need to look at your mindset and your behavior and your nervous system. So there's an alignment. So I love the fact that and I'd love to get a list of your stuff and have a longer conversation, maybe offline.
Yes.
Because it's an important part of my work too.
I probably can't afford you, but if you're willing to do it with me, I'd be over the moon. So thank you. Yeah, absolutely. The world speaks in riddles, markets, politics, power, the very nature of consciousness itself. But what if there were guides, a secret fellowship dedicated to reading the signs, to building bridges between the seen and the unseen? The gray robes operate in the space others fear or cannot comprehend. We map the territory between spiritual awakening and practical revolution, between ancient wisdom and radical innovation. 12 dimensions guide us. One mission impels us. Find out more at grayrobes.org. That's grayrobes.org. What can we say about healthy and unhealthy masculinity? In other words, the archetypal male, if we want to see it as what a young man perceives. What does a healthy masculine look like? What does unhealthy masculine look like? And how do these young men internalize the correct model and begin to grow into that?
I love that. So why don't we start with the unhealthy? And I want to, it's a continuum. So I want to be really clear. I'm not I don't want to demean anyone where you are at in your life. As long as you
Sure.
recognize, hey, I'm here and I'm growing, that's awesome. But I think it's stages, and I think it's a continuum. So, like for instance, I'm thinking about a couple that I work with, and the guy's reaction when he doesn't get his way, and I did a video on this a couple weeks ago, is to take his toys and go home. And I see, and that's like a kind of a gross but funny way of talking about it. To me, that's an unhealthy version of masculine. I don't get my way, I'm going to take my toys and go home. If you're 5, I get that. If you're 20, no. 25, no. If you're 50, fuck no. Like by then you should have management of your own nervous system, and you like, okay, I might feel like it, but I'm not actually going to do that. I'm going to get the help I need to undo that in my nervous system, and engage my spouse, my friends, my family differently. So as one expression of unhealthiness is, I don't get my way, I'm going to withdraw, take my toys and go home. The other extreme of that is like, I don't get my way, I'm going to become hyper aggressive. I don't mean assertive, like making a claim for what I want in a clear and precise manner. Aggressive, like physically aggressive, my tone, my volume, my body. I'm like, okay, if you're 16 and that's the way you play around in the play field, whatever. Okay, yeah. As you're a kid, yeah, I get that stuff. You got to kind of figure out how to do that thing. But if you're getting into young adulthood, that should be behind you. Doesn't mean it is, because I see it all the time. But so those extremes, like take my toys and go home, and or I become hyper aggressive as I don't get my way. To me, those are two examples of unhealthy or less than healthy masculine. The healthy sorry, let me stop there.
Oh,
You're going to say
well,
something.
no, I was just going to cheer for that, because here again we have ancient wisdom and Aristotle, who spoke of a golden mean, and
Mm,
virtues lie between two vices. You
yeah,
just said in this case the two vices are, I'm either taking my toys and going home, I'm not going to play anymore, right? Which is what
yeah.
5-year-olds do, or
Mhm.
hyper aggressive, which is off-putting and scary, especially to the women in your life, right? You want
Yeah.
to find the mean, which is in this case to be assertive, but in a emotionally controlled and reflective way. I take it.
Yeah. And the middle path, and when I work with clients, let's just assume for the moment, let's go back to your question, but I just want to say this because this came up in my mind when you're saying something earlier too. Because you described how you do now your relation with your wife. Like I'm aware of, I manage, and I want to express in healthier ways what I'm feeling, and we have this conversation. That's awesome. What I find with clients, whether the men or women, is like most people come to me on certain emotions with extremes. Either they're overly expressive, consequential to the relationship, or they're underly expressive because they're fear of sharing a particular thing. And what I find sometimes what will happen is sometimes you have to go to the other extreme to find the middle ground. But you have to find a safe environment. I don't mean a safe place like in the schools we have academic centers, but in your relationship where you can have agreements. And this, I do a lot of work with couples, and we talk about agreements. Like you might come and say, I don't handle anger well because I shut my anger down. I'm going to start practicing to be more aware of and expressive of it, not to become violent, never, but like I might not do this in a skillful way, and I just need a space to practice. And we get an agreement, like, okay, as long as there's no violence involved, if you raise your voice because you've never done it before, like you always shut down, and your tone and volume shift, I'll understand it in the short run as you practice something new. Or vice versa, like, oh my God, I spit out of my emotions are all over the place, and I need to go and I shut them down. Like short term, I understand that as long as we get down to the middle path. So we're like, you are aware of them, you're able to manage them and express them in healthy ways. I just want to point out that those extreme things also show up everywhere else too. You eventually find that middle path.
That's beautiful, and a lot of people don't realize that their closest relationships not only are but must be those opportunities to practice. So even if you're using your friends and family as guinea pigs for your personal development, you don't have a choice, because those are the people who are around you all the time. Like you've got to do that. And it's
And
like
you have to let them know in advance you're going to try new things because it's not really fair. Just like show up as a
spring
different
it on
human
them.
being. Yeah.
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 So I take it then communicating about your journey of, say, emotional self-regulation or responding to other people's comments and behavior is so communicating about that, thinking about thinking, thinking about feeling, metacognition,
Yeah.
affect is part of this, and it is um so communicating about your journey of metacognition or meta um relation, the
Yeah.
relational part is got to be part and parcel to it. Otherwise, you may throw people for a loop and they don't know how to deal with you.
And I would say that's part of the more mature masculine, yeah, in terms of the continuum, less healthy, more healthy. That's part of the more healthy version of the masculine. But it's a process. Like if we were perfect, whatever that might mean, life would be really boring. We're imperfect for various, family of origin reasons and cultural reasons and ethnicity, nationality, geographic reasons. We all have various ways of doing these various things. So like have grace for yourself and do the fucking work. Yeah, at the same time. Yeah.
Right, right. And the work, I think this is really so much the key to all this is that you are going to meet challenges. You are going to have adversity. It's in how you well, there's two things. I remember the wisdom of Viktor Frankl in his famous book. He was in a concentration camp and came out of it and wrote books on, and one of the best insights is about finding the space between stimulus and response. And in
Yeah.
that space is the place of your growth and your freedom. A lot of people can't even find the space these days.
That's a huge part of the work, but I would say that's like step two. First one is self-awareness. Step two is creating that space. You're going from reactive to responsive. You're more a
Mm,
choice. But this is where the evolution of consciousness comes in because you want to evolve your moral code, as example, from self-centered to ethnocentric to world-centric to, if you want to speak of the Buddhist, like the Bodhisattva vow, all sentient beings. Like you expand your reach of love and care and compassion to more and more beings in the world. You don't I think that's really important as part of the evolution of consciousness, complexity of thought. Like a lot of people, when you watch this, especially online, it's very binary. It's this or this. And if you're not this, then you're evil. If you're not this, you're, back and forth. Like there's no nuances. There's no complexity. There's no recognition of history and culture. And like, there's a lot of forces at play that help determine the world we've created together. And we need much more complexity of thought. And part of that is the evolution of how you think from binary to more complex to more
well,
complex
and
to more.
complexity of recognition of the complexity of our life circumstances too. I think and I'm curious. You may find this horrifying, but I've and a lot of people I know and have been involved with intellectually trash spiral dynamics, for example. Um, they say it's too hierarchical, it's too this, it's too that, it's not realistic. And it's like it's to me, doesn't need to be anything but a heuristic. It's
Yeah.
about internal complexity and external complexity
Yeah.
and the sort of dynamics between those. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to overthink it. And for those of you who don't know about spiral dynamics, I'll try to remember to put a link in there and you can follow that path. But essentially, I think it's there's such a hostility to the idea that people go through psychosocial developmental stages, and it seems as obvious to me as the nose on anyone's face. It's not a perfect heuristic, but it's certainly useful. What do you think about spiral dynamics?
I got certified level 1 and 2. I was friends with Don Beck back during the Bush administration, Bush Jr. I spent a lot of time with Don. I was part of the Underthrow Institute. So, the whole kind of developmental framework Ken Wilber created. I love that stuff. And like every model, it's not the territory. Don't hold it too tightly. It's interesting. I love it as kind of a way to think about the world, but don't attach yourself to it like it is the world. No, it's just the model. But I love it. I've used it in all my work, whether it's with couples, individuals, groups, or even my public policy work. I think it's quite useful. And I just want to
Same.
throw out one last thing, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
And there's 20 lines of development. We've touched morals or ethics. We've touched cognitive complexity, including spiral dynamics. Another thing for young men to cultivate the capacity to do is social awareness. Like, and I've seen some of the research that shows empathy is driving down because everyone's on their devices. They actually don't know how to connect with another human being, problem socially. But I would say also, besides self-regulation and self-mastery and developing physical capabilities and all the things we've been talking about, I think what's also necessary too is empathy and social awareness. Like, start being aware of how what you do has an effect on other people. Doesn't mean you have to change your behavior. Just be aware of it. I'm not saying like shut down because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. But like, just be aware of what you do, how it affects other people, and be aware of how they do with each other affects each other. And then be aware of like the sociocultural dynamics that help influence how people show up in the world and influence how they think and the worldviews they operate out of. Like, the more awareness you have of that space too, can help you make better decisions for yourself, your family, your community. And if you're a young man, maybe you don't have a family, but yourself. Let's just start with yourself. And you're maybe less likely to be activated or triggered by whatever the thing is, because you realize where it comes from, or you have a sense of where it comes from. Doesn't mean you don't take action on it, but you're not like, I have to do this thing because whatever the emotions that come out. And part of that is, yes, being aware of self, but also being aware of like, ooh. And the way I like to talk about it is make a distinction between understanding and accepting. Have the complexity of thought and the social awareness so you understand why people do what they do. Doesn't mean you have to accept their behavior. That's a completely different conversation. But try to understand why, and that's where the curiosity comes in, and we shared with earlier. Try to understand why people believe what they believe and the whole perspectives and the behaviors that they do in the world. That can go a long way, especially for young men.
I want to give a presentation to young men just about eye contact, just in terms of social awareness. It's like, okay, the first thing that one of the first things you need to learn about human interaction is to make eye contact and how to make eye contact. Because there's flirt eye contact, fuck eye contact. There is fight eye contact, and there is fellowship eye contact.
Well,
Let's work on the third one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck, fight, and fellowship. I like that.
Exactly. Let's go with the third one, right? All right. I know we're running out of time. Your time is valuable. Will you indulge us with one more question?
Of course.
Great. I really wanted us to be able to do a whole bunch of stuff on relationships today, but we got through so many interesting conversation pieces that we didn't get to relationships to the depth that I would like to. But if there's one thing you could leave our audience with on healthy relationships, what would it be?
Curiosity. You said something that I thought was brilliant, and if we have more time, we can unpack. But it's like the misperception of what your partner said, and you assume it's the worst intent, and that leads to so many conflicts. So instead of just acting on your interpretation of her or his behavior, what you think it means, usually interpreted in a really bad way, and maybe it is, maybe they did intend to do the thing or say the thing. Okay. Be curious before you act on it, because we're not 3 or 5. Ask questions, and ask questions as if you're curious, not like you're a lawyer trying to nail them for the thing, because they'll just get defensive. But really be curious. That can solve a lot of conflicts before they start.
Michael Ostrolenk, you are a scholar and a Senex. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Max. Great conversation, man. Appreciated it.